Hello, everyone, and welcome to this introduction to this week's podcast. I'm Clay Jenkins, and I'm home. I'm home. I'm in my kitchen. Well, dining room. Well, office. After the whole summer on the road, I was on the road from April something to yesterday. I arrived home about 5 p.m. yesterday after driving across the state of Montana. And, of course, I, in 2 days, heard an enormous amount of news and commentary about the killing of Charlie Kirk in Orem, Utah on Wednesday, and I have satellite, XM satellite radio or Sirius, whichever it is, and I was able to listen to commentary on across the political spectrum. And the common thread was, we may be about to precipitate something really, really, really crazy, violent, spasmodic. This is more than a political killing. This one has the possibility of really unleashing some of the darker energies in the nation. And frankly, I have not heard our national leaders on the right, at least, saying, calm down, everyone. Some are doing it. But right at the top, we're hearing retribution and blame. We need national leadership that consoles us, urges us to lower the temperature, urges us to avoid violence, urges us to take a deep breath, urges us to step back and look in the mirror. We need that. It's essential that we get that. We're not getting that. And there's a lot of craziness on the left, too. You know, if you've been watching on Twitter, on X, the people crowing and cheering, saying, there's a start. That kind of obscene nonsense. Really, really, really upsetting. And great historians, John Meacham, Douglas Brinkley, they're all saying something very similar, which is this is an inflection point and we need to brace ourselves. Now, we can hope that with the short attention span of the American people, and football season starting and school starting and Jeffrey Epstein and all the other stuff, all that's going wrong at the FBI and the Justice Department, the border, we can hope that will be distracted by the rush of events and that this will not precipitate a real national crisis. I mean, a deep, widespread, violent national crisis, but I don't think we can be sure. So when I was driving along the freeways and highways of Montana listening to all this on an absolutely perfect autumn day with the Yellowstone River just stunning, I thought, I'm going to call Beau. I'm going to call Beau Breslin, my friend from Skidmore College in upstate New York, because he's a constitutional historian. I know he will have been thinking about this. He'll be the perfect person to talk to on this occasion because he is a Democrat. He's left-leaning, I would think, but he's a very fair person, and he's not a partisan in any significant way. He'll bring clarity to this, and I think that the purpose of this program is to bring clarity to the world that's swirling around us. And that's why it was the Jefferson Hour, because Jefferson is a great lens through which to look at all of this. There's a long, long, long history of political violence in the United States. We're not unique in this, but we have something that other nations don't tend to have, which is an unbelievable number of guns of great technological sophistication, and people increasingly not afraid to use them. If you like what we're doing and understand that there will be people that violently disagree with what I'm saying, this is a special time for you to support the program, because we're going to need to show that there's a solidarity behind these views. And if you like the essay that I have provided today, if you let me know, I'll send it to you, because I do believe that it's rational. That doesn't mean that it's likely to persuade many people. But again, at some point in your life, you have to speak for the world that you want to live in, and you have to decry the one that you do not want to live in. And I do not want to live in a world where a pundit of any sort, or a politician, or a university faculty member, or a singer, a poet, a state legislator can be gunned down by someone who, if this kid that shot and killed Charlie Kirk, if what we hear is true, is 22 years old. Well, he's not even formed yet. What does he know? What has he seen? What has he experienced? He's still growing up, and yet he has access to these weapons of mayhem that did not exist until really the post-World War II period, and particularly the last 30 or 40 years. And the debate on guns and the Second Amendment has moved so far right as to be off the charts now. But we're going to have that conversation. So join the Friends group, join the book club, subscribe at the highest level that you're willing to pay. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you want more of these Jefferson Watch essays. Let's have this conversation among ourselves if we can't make it happen for the entire nation. So thank you. Let's go to the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this really important edition of Listening to America. I'm Clay Jenkinson, and across from me virtually is my good friend, Beau Breslin of Skidmore College in New York State, author of a number of books that relate to our topic today. 2004, The Communitarian Constitution. 2009, From Words to Worlds, Exploring Constitutional Functionality. 2021, The Constitution for the Living, Imagining How 5 Generations of Americans Would Rewrite the Nation's Fundamental Law. We actually had a conversation about that last book a year or so ago, Beau, so welcome.
Oh, thanks, Clay. Thanks. It's such a great joy to be back on the show.
It's such an important moment, and I wanted to turn to you because I knew that of all the people I know who are historians and public intellectuals, you would be able to talk about this issue in a way that will help our listeners understand where we are and how we got here. So we're recording this on Friday, the 12th of September, 2025. On Wednesday, the 10th, at midday in Orem, Utah, the conservative pundit Charlie Kirk was assassinated by a lone gunman, one shot from about 200 yards away. This has thrown the nation into a convulsion of agony, retribution, bewilderment, fear, I think. So where were you when you heard the news, and what was your immediate response?
Yeah, so actually I had a personal immediate response. I was in class. I came back and I had a text from my daughter who lives in Salt Lake City. So it was in the backyard, her backyard. And I had a personal response beyond being utterly horrified, Clay, about so many things about the murder and the assassination itself. Let me put it into context for you so that your listeners know where I'm coming from. I disagree with almost everything Charlie Kirk said. That said, I will defend to the end of my days his ability and others' ability to speak about topics that they're passionate about. The First Amendment means something, and as a result, I will defend till I'm dead the right of individuals to speak even those most controversial terms. That said, I had a personal reaction to it because I write an op-ed for the Fulcrum, and I used to write every week. Now I write every month. And on November 12th of the past year, about a week after Trump won the election, I wrote a piece that was a bit of a mea culpa. And I said, I'm a Democrat, and I have to recognize that we did not campaign well, that in some ways we are what people are saying about us, meaning we are elite, kind of snobby intellectuals on the right and the left coasts. And it was a moment in which I said, I need some humility as I move forward and try to get the Democratic Party back in power. And so it was a mea culpa. And shortly after that piece was published, and I got a screed that said, sort of criticized my statements about living, authentically and so on. And it came from Charlie Kirk. And I thought, I don't know who this guy is at the time. And I looked him up, and I was impressed with how many followers he had. But so not only was I horrified by the murder, but sort of I had that personal connection with Charlie Kirk that made it a little bit more deep for me.
Yes. So did he respond? He wrote to you. Did you wrote to him then?
No, I did not write it because that's my general sense in this situation is when people write to me, and they write to me, 10 or 12 times when one of those pieces come out, I'm not going to respond to them if they are what I would describe as some level of partisan, right? We can get into a legitimate engaged debate, which I have many times, but he just decided to be nasty. And so I just ignored it. But then when my daughter told me the news of Charlie Kirk in Utah, I thought, wow, I went back and looked at that piece, looked at his email.
I'm talking to Beau Breslin of Skidmore, constitutional expert, historian, a good friend. Have you ever been threatened?
Not directly. And part of that is because the outlet for my pieces, which you know all too well because you've written in it too, is the Fulcrum, and they're trying to be bipartisan. They're trying to publish articles that speak across political difference, and can come up with a shared vocabulary. So as I think about this, Clay, and you're an expert on this too, so we can have a conversation about this. As I think about it, I think about a couple things. One, this country was born twice on the backs of violence, right? So let us not
forget. You mean the Revolution and the Civil War?
Correct. The Revolution created, was the birth of the country. And it is, Thomas Jefferson says the tree of liberty needs to be replenished from time to time with the blood of tyrants and patriots, right? So it was a very violent time in which our country was birthed. Same is true about the rebirth in the Civil War. It was born out of violence. I'm not condoning any violence. Believe me, tell your listeners need to hear me. I think what happened to Charlie Kirk is not only horrific, illegal, immoral, all of those things, but part of the blood of American society itself is a tendency towards violence. That is what our country was born on both times. But it is part of a long-standing pattern of Americans relying on violence as a way to dissent. We should not do that, but that's a part of the tradition of American society.
I agree. I'm talking to Beau Breslin of Skidmore. We're talking about how to put in context the assassination of Charlie Kirk on Wednesday, the 10th of September. I was in my car driving across Montana, so I had many hours to listen to a range of channels, Fox, MSNBC, CNN, POTUS, etc. And what I heard was alarm. So, of course, everyone deplores this killing and sends out prayers and thoughts to the families and etc. But I heard a lot of very serious historians and scholars saying, uh-oh, this might precipitate something much worse, that there might be retribution. This might create a spasm of copycat violence. There might be a sense in which now someone on the left has to be killed in order to right this. You've heard this too. I mean, I'm surprised that the most serious historians are saying this might be bigger than the usual sort of thing that happens, bigger than Gabby Gifford, for example.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think the right word that you're saying, that you mentioned, is the ascendancy of the right. It used to be that when you dueled and when you fought somebody with weapons, it was with swords and knives. Now it's with guns. And there are so many guns out there because it's a great equalizer. It's the democratic example of weaponry. And so, it's easy for individuals, if they want to take a shot at Charlie Kirk or Donald Trump, or quite frankly, George Wallace, RFK, JFK. It's easy now to have access to that democratization of guns, and that's problematic. My thoughts on this are, sure, we should do a good amount of investing in mental health and those sorts of resources, but we have to do equally good job of investing in gun regulation. To ignore that and say, oh, it's all about mental health, is just putting your head in the sand.
I couldn't agree more. In the third segment of this program, I'm going to read an essay that I wrote just about this, and I want to get your reaction. But I'm talking with Beau Breslin. So let me defend Charlie Kirk for a moment. As you say, the First Amendment grants him the absolute right to say a lot of things that he believes or pretends to believe. He goes to college campuses and he invites dispute and debate. He's not just speaking alone in a microphone somewhere in a studio. He's out engaging in the arena, and he welcomes the dialogue. Now, the dialogue is a little bit skewed because he has the microphone and he can shout down anyone that he needs to. And, so it's not as if this is a debate playing by the Queensberry rules, but he is out there engaged, and he says, I want this. That's one thing that I admire. He believes in some sense in the free marketplace of ideas, which is the heart of the Enlightenment. And he's going to go among underrepresented Americans, young men particularly, who are bewildered, who feel that they're being left behind, who believe that manhood is on trial, and that it's no longer a world in which men can be men, that political correctness and wokeness and the Me Too movement and everything else is somehow making men feel like they're being persecuted. And I think that's a very widespread belief. It helped to elect Donald Trump in 2024. Charlie Kirk specializes in this sort of thing. And I think that the fact, Beau, that probably even on your campus, there are many young men and some women who are looking for clarity or leadership or a new vision of America, and they're discontented. They don't really know what to make of it, but they know they're frustrated by it. And along comes someone with great charisma and certitude and millions of followers, and he wants to engage them, and he stirs them up and makes them feel that there's possibility. That's okay, as long as there's a counterbalancing discourse, and that's up to us. That's up to people that disagree with Charlie Kirk. So I think that is a pretty interesting thing that he was doing. He didn't have security. He believed in the conversation. He wasn't just going to Liberty University and Hillsdale and places where he knew he would get a totally respectful response. He was fighting the good fight. And if he's persuasive, that's how democracy works, right?
That's right. And I think Ezra Klein, no conservative firebrand. I think Ezra Klein got it right when he wrote, it must have been yesterday, column in the New York Times where he said Charlie Kirk was doing politics the right way. So we might disagree, and Ezra Klein certainly disagrees with what Charlie was saying, but he was doing it the right way. He was engaging people where they were. So my defense of him is actually multidimensional, right? I think politically, I probably would get in nothing but a shouting match with him, but his right to speak freely, combined with the way in which he was approaching folks, as you said, he was approaching people where they were and engaging in conversation, is the model of what we should be doing, even if what was coming out of his mouth can be quite, from my perspective, quite dangerous.
The majority of universities and colleges in America have a left-leaning ethos and a left-leaning faculty. There's a widespread disenchantment with the way universities conduct their ideologies. So we'll take a break. When we come back, I want to go through some of the moments in American history that prove that political violence is no recent thing. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to Listening to America. I have the great joy on a very difficult moment of talking to my friend Beau Breslin. The minute this event occurred in Utah and Orem on the 10th of September, I thought of you and contacted you immediately and said, we've got to do a program about this because I'm a humanities scholar. You are too, subset historian. And we both believe that we can't understand what's going on now unless we contextualize it in the larger dynamics of history. So just starting from the beginning, as you said, we were born in revolution, the Boston Tea Party, no one hurt, but property damage. Loyalists were tarred and feathered during the revolution. Thomas Jefferson himself, that great lover of liberty, proposed a bill of attainder against what he took to be a terrorist, a loyalist terrorist. A bill of attainder is condemning someone to death without trial. That's a violation of the most basic rights of habeas corpus. The Boston Massacre, of course. Then you move on to things like, let's go to one of the more interesting ones, because we can almost feel retrospectively humorous about it, but we shouldn't in the face of what has just happened. Matthew Lyon versus Roger Griswold in 1798. So can you tell that story?
Yeah. So, it's Roger Griswold of Connecticut, Matthew Lyon of Vermont.
Congress of the United States.
Yep, they're in the Congress. The fact of the matter is Lyon apparently spits at Griswold. So
they're political enemies.
and he had chewing tobacco. That was the thing, and so it was I guess a projectile of some sort.
So wait, Representative Lyon of Vermont, so unhappy with Griswold of Connecticut because they're on opposite political camps. Early on, this is 1798, approaches him and spits tobacco at him, maybe in his face. Right. There's going to be a response to that. There's going to be a response to that. What happened?
Well, so one of the things that's interesting is that the Congress refused to expel Lyon, and Griswold wanted that to be part of the punishment.
So he sought a peaceful due process means of responding to the spit. In other words, if Congress had said either censured Lyon or expelled him, maybe this doesn't rise to violence.
Correct. And so because Congress chooses not to expel him, Griswold decides to take the law in his own hands. He picks up a cane on the House floor, much like a later story that we'll get to, and he starts beating on Lyon. Lyon himself picks up a fire poker and starts, the fight is happening on the Congress floor.
So you just get a picture, it's a little amusing because you think of men in wigs of a long earlier time and buckled shoes, and one of them spits and another one has a cane, and then the first one responds with a red hot poker or maybe just a poker, and nothing much happens. That people pull them apart eventually, and it settles down after a time. So this one ends pretty happily compared to others.
Yeah. So and there's a very famous. I encourage all your listeners to look up. There's a very famous cartoon about this particular moment that sort of tells the story in not a humorous way, but there's a visual image that is worth seeing.
So there were political cartoons even back then. This is 1798. The event occurred on February 15th, the Ides of February. And this cartoon I've seen many times. It's quite funny in its own way. But we're moving towards greater violence. Of course, we have Gabriel's Rebellion and Nat Turner's Rebellion. We have a series of slave revolts that occur throughout the South, and they're put down with extraordinary force. When I think of Gabriel's revolt, and the governor of Virginia was James Monroe, and there were many hangings, torturings, and beatings. Really, white Virginia went into kind of a siege mentality, and eventually Jefferson wrote to his friend Monroe and said, "Yeah, maybe enough now on the reprisals. Okay, enough," because there was just a spasm of anti-slave violence that came after this, and always with the same intent. You want to rebel? Watch what we can do to put that down. You want to try it again? So that sounds awfully familiar in the face of the Middle East.
Blaine, let me insert something here, just as we're talking about some very famous moments of violence and very and interesting parts of American history, but folks in the United States should never lose sight of the fact that slavery itself is a violent institution.
Yes, it is inherently violent. And I've been performing as Jefferson and talking about Jefferson for 50 years, Beau. It's like a long, interesting marriage, and it's had its ups and downs. But what I've learned, and I'm from North Dakota, which is a fairly homogenous state until very recently with the oil boom, very few African Americans. So I've had to come at this issue not as someone from Alabama or Louisiana or Virginia. I've come at it as an intellectual from the outside. But what I came to conclude early on was slavery cannot continue without violence and the threat of violence. If you just said, we're having an honor system here, so we want you all to stay on the plantation and work yourselves to death for us and have almost no time to yourself, and we will maybe marry you off to people we want or not, sell you whenever it pleases us, torture you if it seems useful. So why don't you just stick around? Nobody would stay. I mean, a handful would have stayed under such conditions. So violence is the only mechanism to hold this thing together. And here's where I am with the 1619 Project. Say what you want about it. I believe they are right to say that racial violence has been fundamental to the entire course of American history to this day.
Agreed. Agreed. And so in hindsight, and I know, one of the great things about your show is that it's hard to put you in the 21st century to put yourself in the shoes of those in the 18th and 19th and 20th century to sort of think about things. But we can look back on the antebellum period and think like the Jeffersons of the world thought maybe that slavery would just fade away. And, the Wilmot Proviso and others, there, this notion that somehow these politicians, they think that, if we just wait long enough, slavery will go away. That was, in hindsight, simply not true. It was going to take a violent revolution, a civil war, to eliminate it. And that's part, as I said, of the DNA of American society.
So presidents serve many functions in our society, as you know, and one of them is to be the griever in chief or the consoler in chief. And almost all presidents have learned how to do this very well. Ronald Reagan was a great master at it. I think of his speech after the space shuttle disaster. I mean, this is what presidents do. And I'm sorry to say that the current president's response to the killing of Charlie Kirk was to say, the left's responsible. This is the left. It's the radical left that made this happen. And of course, there will be tens of millions of people who agree with that because it's being said by the president of the United States. So far, he's made no effort to console the nation and to say we need to bring down the temperature. We need to listen to each other more. We have to stop thinking about violent responses, that we're a civil society. I'm urging all of my followers, please, to take a deep breath and remember that we're a nation of order and laws, and we must not now descend into greater violence. I'm sorry, Beau, but you're not hearing that.
Yeah, you're not. And, the reality is it was even deeper than that. So when President Trump lists those things, those particularly violent moments in the last, I don't know, couple of years, he only lists violence against right-wing or Republican folks. Going back as far as the horrific assassination attempt of Steve Scalise, right, when he was playing in the congressional softball game. But he's not talking about the Minnesota lawmakers who two of whom lost their lives, and two members of that community also were badly injured because they're Democrats. Clay, I think it's disgusting. I think it's disgraceful behavior. I got to be careful about what I say on the public radio. But what I've come to realize as a political observer is that that's the formula for what Trump is doing, is the formula for success in the political arena these days.
Correct.
You take you take a particular moment, whether it's tragic like Charlie Kirk or whatever, and you go the most extreme, the farthest the pendulum will swing to the right or the left, and the left is doing it too. And politics in that way, I think, is broken, and we have to figure out a way. And what I'll say is, way out of this, there's this great political scientist who's getting his 15 minutes of fame. His name is Robert Pape, and he's out of the University of Chicago. And he's everywhere these days because he studies, and has for 3 decades, political violence. And he says, interestingly enough, that one major response and answer to the rise of political violence in this moment is joint statements from members of the Democratic and Republican Party. So get Obama and Trump together on a video in which they condemn this sort of activity. Get Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell together on that. Get young Republicans and young Democrats together and go public with their social media on a joint statement. That won't happen, and yet I think there's some truth to that being a possible way out of this.
Yes, I do think. I mean, I think that if President Trump and let's say Gavin Newsom had a joint 5-minute televised talk where they both said, we can't go on like this. We just urge everybody of both sides, take a deep breath and back away from this precipice. So, my former mother-in-law used to say, you can ratchet things up or you can ratchet things down. And I'm afraid that things are getting ratcheted up. And I have to say that it's not just Trump and his MAGA friends. I'm sure you saw on social media an outpouring of hate against Charlie Kirk after his assassination. People saying he had it coming. Good riddance. We need to. That's a start. You've seen all of this, and but then and that's deplorable. That's disgusting. And I'm disgusted to be a person who's generally associated with the left of center part of the spectrum to see that happening, because I've always wanted to think that the people somewhat left of center, not the far left, but somewhat left of center, had a deep decency and abhorrence of this sort of thing and the violent rhetoric and the violence, but it's not any longer always true. And anonymity is part of that. You know, you can say things on social media that you wouldn't dare say if you were actually in a public meeting. So there's that. But then there's another point that's being made, and I think this one is, I want to be careful here, really careful. But Charlie Kirk said many, many times, as an absolutist on the Second Amendment, he said if there are killings, and he was actually talking about this at the moment of his killing, he said if there are deaths and gun violence and even school shootings and so on, I'm afraid that's the price of freedom in a nation with a Second Amendment. Now, I'm not saying that there's an irony here, that he deserved anything or anything else, but I'm saying he's on the record clearly saying that we can absorb a fair amount of gun violence because gun ownership and the right to keep and bear arms is that important. I don't agree with that. You don't agree with that. I don't think any of the founding fathers would agree with that, but that's an argument that he has made. So, all right, I want to move on. After the Civil War, black codes, lynchings, yes, we had the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, but the former Confederate South used violence and violent intimidation to essentially reestablish slavery by other means. And whenever a black person, especially a black man, appeared to violate whatever the code was, he could be rounded up, tied to a tree, tortured, and set on fire. And so political violence occurs when Abraham Lincoln is assassinated, but it also occurs in a much more widespread, general, and largely unnamed form. So I just wanted to go over this with you. We've had 4 presidents assassinated. So Abraham Lincoln, James Garfield, William McKinley, and JFK, 4. But we've had 14 who have survived assassination attempts, including, of course, Ronald Reagan, including more recently Donald Trump twice, including FDR, who was nearly assassinated in Miami before he took office. We've had a lot of assassination activity in American history. 14, as I understand it, is about 1 in 3.5 presidents. Right. And those are the ones we know about. Right. And there are probably countless ones that get interdicted well before they reach that stage. But we are a violent people, and we've always been a violent people. And now violence has a cachet, I think, that it did not have 50 years ago. And I'll talk about this in the third segment. But if you turn on tonight, if you go home tonight, turn on your television and just surf around for 3.5 hours, you will see so many acts of graphic violence that you will be appalled that this is our popular culture, that we seem to be okay with it because we seem to celebrate it so completely in our popular culture. Think of the video games that young men are watching while we talk here. Okay, so to go on to the 20th century.
One quick thing about the 14 attempted assassinations. These were, up till FDR, these are happening in an environment in which Congress is still paramount, right? Up until FDR sort of switches it and the president becomes super important, and you maybe point to Woodrow Wilson or whatever. Congress is still paramount. In our day and age, Clay, with the unitary executive theory and the way Trump is sort of trying to consolidate power, I'm guessing there's going to be more attempts on the presidents. Now, I'm not talking about attempts on Trump's, I'm talking about future presidents, because the president is more important today than he was 100 years ago in terms of shaping American culture. And if we believe the common denominator, again, is that people are those who are assassins are frightened by a fundamental change in the worldview that they subscribe to, the president becomes more and more a face and place for them to try to restore that. I think this is a scary moment for that reason alone.
Yeah, so the idea of assassinating somebody like Warren Harding or Grover Cleveland seems much less potent than assassinating someone who's now essentially a unitary executive, nearly a king. And so he killed the king. So, July 13, 2024, that shooter missed, grazed the president's ear, 1 or 2 inches of difference. I can't even imagine what would have happened to the United States if we had watched on high definition television the head of the president of the United States explode. That's what happened to John Kennedy. Fortunately, the Zapruder film is hazy. There's widespread agreement that Lee Harvey Oswald tried to kill a judge in Dallas just a few weeks before he apparently tried to kill, and maybe did kill, John Kennedy. It's not clear that Kennedy was his only target. He could have wanted to get anyone who was sufficiently famous, and that's what Jacqueline Kennedy said. She wanted it almost to be a conspiracy because she said some complete loser, lone nut changes the course of human history by what? Because of his frustrations about life. And then again, Kennedy, on the night before the assassination in Fort Worth, he said to her, "If some nut wants to kill me, there's no way it can be stopped." And with this.
It's interesting because, I've done sort of informal surveys with my students. And last semester, I did this interesting little informal, I teach Intro to American Politics is one of the classes I teach. So I got a big class there and I did an informal survey. And I have a couple of what I would describe as adult, senior folks who audit the class. And so I asked the class, what is the most impactful moment of your life? And the students all said COVID because they come after 9/11. I asked the handful of adults, what's the most impactful moment of your life? And they said Kennedy's assassination and secondarily 9/11, which surprised me. Like, I'm 59. Kennedy's assassination was a little bit before me. 9/11 is for me the big one. But for them, Kennedy assassination was a game changer in the world.
Absolutely. We need to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about that. Then I want to read this essay so that I can get your response to it. I'm talking with my friend Beau Breslin of Skidmore, constitutional expert, historian, someone who's always eager for a good humanities-based, evidence-based conversation. We're talking about gun mayhem and political violence in the United States. We'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to this very important edition of Listening to America. I'm talking with Beau Breslin of Skidmore College in upstate New York. Beau, I've been thinking about America hard as we approach our 250th birthday, and in a certain sense, the killing of Charlie Kirk may be the launch event of the cultural conversation that occurs around 2025. We might not have expected that, but I think this one's a big one. This is not just some guy. This is somehow central, a friend of Donald Trump, a friend of Trump's children, a person with millions of followers, almost like the great white hope of the future of the MAGA movement, much more, I would say, than the current vice president of the United States. As I think about America 250, here's my characterization. I was born in 1955. This has been the age of disillusionment. Kennedy killed. Malcolm X killed, McCarthy scared during the 1950s, the craziness of the 1960s. But we do, generally speaking, back away from the brink after a while. What's it going to take, do you think? I've heard everyone ask this and no one has an answer.
I don't have an answer that's probably satisfactory, but I'll throw one thing out there, and that is, I have long said that our problem is, and it's exacerbated in this moment, is that those on the right and those on the left, conservatives and liberals, Republicans and Democrats, do not speak the same language. Until we have a common language where we can talk about these things, we're in trouble. And I'll give you an example. I think we mentioned early on the great historian from Harvard now, maybe I haven't mentioned Jill Lepore, right? Jill Lepore is a super smart historian. Jill Lepore says our problem in part is that, for example, Democrats and the left think of abortion as freedom, guns as murder. But the right thinks of guns as freedom, abortion as murder. And the problem is that she's exactly right. We can't come up with a common language that sort of bridges that gap. If I think of abortion, the capacity of a woman to terminate her abortion, as the definition of freedom, and I think of guns as a recipe for murder, how am I going to talk to my dad, who's a Republican, my late dad, who's a Republican from Selma, Alabama, who thinks just the opposite? So until we can come up with a common language, I don't think we have much of a start in front of us.
A common language, and I believe a common narrative. I think we've lost a common narrative. We don't agree on what this country is, how it became what it is, the trajectory of the country. That paradigm, which really peaked around 1963 or 4, is gone now, and now neither side accepts the other's basic narrative of the country. I agree with you about this, and I think one answer to the question is to grant everyone agency. So you may think that guns are murder and abortion is a human right, but we can't go on until you can give some respect to those that believe that guns are freedom and abortion is murder. And the idea that we write each other off so quickly without getting into the arena and duking it out rhetorically.
So I want to make sure that I know we're reaching the end. I want to make sure that you have time to read that statement that you promised to those of us. I haven't heard it, but you have to have time to do that. But let me just interject one thing back at the founding, because I do think this is part of the misplaced, or at least misinformation, misunderstanding about guns and the Second Amendment. I'm a student of the founding. I spent a lot of time in my head, at least, in late 18th century America. And although, as your listeners know, I've become a Jeffersonian, I'm still a little bit of a Madisonian at heart. So I spent a lot.
I'm working on you. Give it time.
Absolutely true. I'm moving in that direction because of your influence. But as folks know, the Madison proposed, as a promise to the Anti-Federalists to ratify the Constitution, he promised a Bill of Rights. In that Bill of Rights, he had his what has become the Second Amendment. And I just want to talk a little bit about that history, because the exact wording of Madison's proposed Second Amendment goes like this: the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So he inserts the right first.
The final clause first.
The final clause that we have first, right? Semicolon. A well-armed and well-regulated militia being the best security of a free state. And here's the important part, Clay. He also had in that original proposal, but no person religiously scrupulous of bearing arms shall be compelled to render military service in person. Okay, so 3 clauses, right? You got the right of the people to keep and bear arms, a well-armed and well-regulated militia being the best security of a free country, and the conscientious objection one: no person religiously scrupulous of bearing arms shall be compelled to render military service in person. What happened to that third clause of Madison's original? It gets edited out by the Congress for a variety of reasons. It seems to me irrational to think of the Second Amendment as an individual right if you're an originalist, in light of that history.
So I'm going to read this to you. This is going to get me some maybe death threats, but I feel so strongly about this, and I'm going to watch you for those who are listening. And if you disagree, go, give me a sign. All right, here we go. The assassination of the political pundit Charlie Kirk in Utah on Wednesday is the latest and by all accounts gravest indication that the United States of America is coming apart, disintegrating. We are at least 2 nations now at war with each other rhetorically and increasingly by way of political violence. Each tribe seems to regard the other as un-American, even treasonous. 80 years after World War II and 36 years after the end of the Cold War, the terms fascist and communist are constantly thrown about when neither one is really true. I've been listening to a wide range of political commentary since the shooting of Mr. Kirk, and surprisingly large percentage of it warns of a widespread descent into street violence, a kind of, for now, low-level civil war. We have an urgent need to bring down the political temperature. Thomas Jefferson said it perfectly in his first inaugural address: every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. We have called by different names brethren of the same principle. America has always been a violent country. We were born in armed revolution. We peopled the continent by way of ever-westering frontiers, where lawlessness, vigilantism, and high-noon duels were coupled with a ruthless ethnic cleansing of Native Americans. Someone from Jupiter sampling our movies, video games, television drama, and miniseries would have to conclude that violence is our national god. Since we lavish so much time and money depicting the possibilities of mayhem, bombings, drive-by shootings, sniping, pitched gun battles by urban gangs, barroom brawls, car chases, domestic abuse, etc., violence in our popular culture is ubiquitous. I will write the same sentence 3 times in the next few minutes. At some point, we are going to have a civil and rigorous national conversation about the problem of guns and gun violence in America. In the days since Charlie Kirk was murdered, major media commentators have been intoning long lists of acts of political violence since the 1960s, beginning with the assassination of JFK and ending with the killings of Kirk and Minnesota's Melissa Hortman. What they haven't spent much time discussing is the common thread that characterizes the great majority of these horrific incidents. JFK, 1963, shot with a .38 bolt-action rifle. Medgar Evans, 1963, a .30-06. Malcolm X, 1965, killed with a sawed-off shotgun and 2 semi-automatic pistols. Martin Luther King, 1968, with a Remington .30-06 rifle. Robert F. Kennedy with a .22 caliber Iver Johnson revolver. George Wallace with a Charter Arms undercover .38 caliber revolver. Ronald Reagan with a Rome RG-14 .22 caliber revolver, etc. Melissa Hortman, 2025, with 3 AK-47 assault rifles and a 9mm handgun, and Charlie Kirk, 2025, with a bolt-action .30-06. All of these attacks involve firearms, of which there are now an estimated 400 million in the United States. We now have 200,000 gunshot incidents every year in America. In 2024, that gun violence resulted in 40,886 deaths and 31,652 injuries. So far in 2025, with 3 months to go, there have been 309 mass shootings in the U.S., with 302 people killed and 1,354 injured. So far this year, there have been 46 school shootings in America. That's more than 1 per week. Remember when the shooting at Columbine High School in 1999 was regarded as a horrific but isolated incident? Is this level of gun violence acceptable to the American people? Our unwillingness to address the issue suggests that we are more willing to wring our hands, sending out our thoughts and prayers to the victims' families, than to do something about it. The United States is unique among first world countries in having a constitutional amendment guaranteeing the people the right to keep and bear arms. England does not have such an amendment, 22 gunshot deaths in 2024. France does not have such an amendment, 150 deaths. Switzerland, 12. Austria, 17. Spain, 53. Canada, just across the imaginary line at the 49th parallel, had just 286 gunshot deaths in 2023. Think about that for a moment. 40,886 gun deaths in the United States, 286 in Canada. Are the people of these countries less free than we are? Perhaps from the perspective of public safety, they are more free. Is it possible, and believe me, I'm asking and not declaring, that it is time to step back and rethink the Second Amendment? It was crafted by men in tights and wigs when a high-tech weapon was a single-shot musket that took between 25 and 50 seconds to reload. If the Founding Fathers could have imagined the AR-15, or the AK-47, or the 9mm handgun, with their capacity to fire more than a dozen rounds per second, would they have guaranteed the people the right to keep and bear arms? At what point does public safety trump gun mayhem? Do the proposed common-sense gun regulations, rigorous universal background checks, improved red flag laws, an end to the gun show loophole, improved mental health care, really represent a slippery slope or the foot through the door that the pro-gun advocates assure us are the first steps towards the confiscation of all the guns in America? If we pass such common-sense laws, would they seriously reduce the slaughter? It may be too late. There would be no calling back the 400 million guns already possessed by the American people. It's true, of course, that guns don't kill people. People do. But would Tyler Robinson, the alleged killer of Charlie Kirk, have been able to murder him with a knife or a baseball bat? He shot Kirk from 200 yards away. Guns magnify the possibility of destruction by magnitudes. How many children would the Sandy Hook shooter have been able to kill with a single-shot musket? The idea that the Second Amendment enshrines an absolute right is a myth. The First Amendment is not an absolute protection of speech or religion. The cliché is correct. You can't shout fire in a crowded theater. You cannot publish tactical military plans that might help an enemy in a time of war. There are even limits to religious freedom in America. The Fifth Amendment is not an absolute, nor is the Fourth, etc. All rights, including the most precious of them, freedom of conscience, have to be balanced against other rights. That's the very nature of law everywhere. The very brief Second Amendment itself explicitly points to regulation. I quote, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." End quote. My larger question is this: what do we Americans really gain from the presence of hundreds of millions of guns in our midst? Do we gain more than we lose? Does the Second Amendment make us better than other nations? Why do our best friends in the global community, including Canada, enjoy all the fruits of civilized life and maintain their individual and collective freedoms without a heavily armed citizenry? I know this for certain. I say again, at some point, we are going to have a serious and mutually respectful national conversation about guns, and just what common sense regulation means is going to be part of that conversation. That's where the debate will occur. The U.S. Constitution is not a suicide pact. Thomas Jefferson believed that free men should have access to firearms back there in 1787, but that is not the essence of Jefferson's constitutional theory. In a letter to Samuel Kirchhoff in 1816, he wrote, "Some men look at constitutions with sanctimonious reverence and deem them like the Ark of the Covenant, too sacred to be touched. They ascribe to the men of the preceding age a wisdom more than human, and approve what they did to be beyond amendment. I certainly am not an advocate for frequent and untried changes in laws, but I know this, that laws and institutions must go hand in hand with the progress of the human mind. We might as well require a man to wear still the coat which fitted him as a child, as civilized society to remain ever under the regimen of their barbarous ancestors." Oh my. A great nation cannot let itself become hostage to the views of people who lived hundreds of years ago. We had to get over slavery and the 3/5 clause to fulfill our destiny in the world's arena. We had to abolish racial segregation. We realized in 1919 that women cannot be denied their place as equal citizens of the United States. We granted Native Americans full citizenship in 1924. We have, slowly, over time, removed most of what is unenlightened or barbarous in the 1787 Constitution. The Second Amendment is important, but is not sacred. What is sacred is a reasonable confidence that one is not going to be gunned down at the grocery store by a screwed-up 19-year-old with a chip on his shoulder and a 9mm handgun in his backpack. In 1952, that disturbed young man would go fight a fistfight somewhere for catharsis. Today, he climbs up on a roof and waits to take his shot. We Americans are a highly civilized people who invent amazing tools, transplant kidneys, hearts, lungs, and even livers, who cracked the genetic code and landed humans safely on the moon. The Constitution is important, the Bill of Rights more so, but great nations find a way to face the big issues in their midst. I'm with Theodore Roosevelt. The Constitution was made for the people, not the people for the Constitution. Think of the utter irrationality of our national gun policy, that there is almost no firearm that is not regarded as legal in America, that one person can have 5 guns or 500, can hoard ammunition, can carry in most states guns into the public arena, concealed or unconcealed, that in most states one can go buy an AR-15 rifle while on his lunch break and be back in time for work. So far as I know, no one is suggesting that we confiscate the guns now in circulation. Few are asking for mandatory universal gun registration, and if they did, they would not get far. Almost nobody objects to individuals owning hunting rifles. Families are rightly entitled to own a gun in case of home invasion. Common sense gun regulation would not change any of this. As a practical matter, I don't believe a responsible gun owner would notice any difference in his daily or lifelong behavior from the kind of modest reforms that are contemplated by responsible social thinkers. Can we at least have a conversation about this? We boast about American freedom, so why is raising these questions off limits in the American public square? Why is it that urging a rational conversation about guns and gun violence is the third rail of public discourse in the U.S., the end of a political career, taboo, worthy of being shouted down before the sentence is even complete? In my opinion, we Americans are straitjacketed by a mythical heritage of the Minuteman, militiamen, and the Green Mountain Boys, and we have shown ourselves to be amazingly tolerant of the epidemic of gun violence in America, now including monthly, sometimes weekly, school shootings. Almost all Europeans are now hesitant to to visit the United States. Think about that. They simply cannot understand why we are doing this to ourselves. European parents are now actually forbidding their children to visit America for fear that they will be caught up in some senseless mall, movie theater, or Walmart shooting. I know some of my friends will disagree with these words. I know that millions of Americans would be appalled by them if they read what I have written. I may actually get death threats for tapping out these words on my laptop computer. There's our vaunted freedom of discourse. Nevertheless, I respect everyone in this debate. All I'm asking for is a serious, sober, and if possible, civil national conversation about gun violence. That's how democracy works. The U.S. Constitution is not a suicide pact. No time like the present. We're about to observe our 250th birthday as a nation. This is a good time to step back and ask ourselves what works and what doesn't any longer in the 1787 Constitution, and to amend our basic charters so that we can begin to amend our ways. I'm Clay Jenkinson. That's my view. What do you think, my friend?
I completely and utterly agree. That was beautiful, elegant, erudite, and quite frankly, I could tell from the heart watching you recite it. So bravo, my friend.
I am in great pain about the possibility that we are going to descend into real craziness here. We'll see you all next week. Thanks to Beau Breslin. I am so glad that we had this conversation. We'll see you all next week for another important edition of Listening to America.